The content of this session is developing your learner's vocabulary of circles. And if you look at the diagram there, you can see that circles are actually quite a bit more complex than most people would realize. This resource should be viewed with developing an understanding of the area of a circle and developing an understanding of pi. And our hope is that these resources working together will inform the development of your course and give you something to work with your learners. The relevance of this content is that learners who want a career in engineering are going to be using these terms on a frequent basis in the workplace and also in their courses. For example, Unit 21905 has really specific information about the knowledge of circles, or requires the learners to have specific knowledge around working with circles. And Unit 26627 also has some requirement for learners to be able to work with measurements, and in some contexts, certainly the engineering context, that's going to include circles as well. The intention of this resource is to familiarize learners with the terms used in relation to circles in engineering and learn how to learn words. The instructions are simple. We're just going to go through our process. It's going to begin with a discussion, asking learners to share what words they already know. And then we're going to go through a guided activity where learners will fold a piece of paper and they'll use that piece of paper as a personal resource for themselves. Then there's going to be a group discussion where learners discuss with each other what they already know. A group problem-solving activity in which learners will card match various words, and finally a vocabulary game. Activity number 1 is simply a discussion. It's simply ask learners what they already know, and it's highly likely that your learners know the diameter, the radius, and perhaps the circumference as well. In my experience, this has been kind of the baseline knowledge of many learners, and some are not even too sure about these terms themselves. So it's just a conversation. What do you already know about circles and so on? That's it. Okay, so for this activity, the idea is that the learners are preparing a resource for themselves, this circle, that they're going to use for the following activities as well. And the idea of this is they're beginning to think about the parts of a circle and the names. What you'll need is a circle like this for each learner. At the end of this session, I'll show you a quick hack, again, so you don't have to sit up all night cutting out circles. The learners will need a ruler, and the learners will also need pens. First thing we do, just ask the learners to fold their circle directly in half, and then rule a line directly down the diameter. Once the learners have ruled down the diameter, sometimes I like them to have a quick discussion about what they think that line is called, and some of them know, and it's a way of letting them begin to think about what the names are and share knowledge between them. But the next thing is simply to fold it in half and then fold it in half again, so into quarters, crimp it, and this time I ask them to rule a line from the center to the side. Once they've ruled down like this, then we can have a discussion about the radius and the diameter and so on. But the next one is a little bit trickier. The next one, I ask them to take a section, or segment I should say, and fold it like so. So they have this bit, and then I ask them to rule down here as well. Okay, so the learners have this in front of them. They each have this. And the challenges for the learners, the next activity, is let them know that there are 7 parts on this circle that have names. And in groups, they have to try to come up with what parts of the circle might be named. That's their activity, and see how many names they do know and see what objects on the circle might actually have a name. For example, they're probably going to come up with the diameter, the radius, and the little line which is called the chord. They're going to probably not be too sure about this, but this is just part of helping them raise questions in their own mind that we're then going to fill in for them. Okay, so we hand out the circle to the learners in groups with a bunch of cards, and we ask them to match them up. So the first one they might find, for example, is radius. We want them to align it with the radius. Moving on to diameter, we want them to identify the diameter. Cross here. Circumference, of course, a bit harder, but right around the outside. We want them to indicate that. Moving on to the chord. Now the chord is that line that marks off that segment. That line right there is the chord. The segment is the piece of the circle that it marks off. So we want the learners to identify what a segment is. And of course the arc is the part of the circumference that goes around the segment. And then the final part is the sector, which is like a piece of pizza. That's how I think of it. The final activity is a vocabulary game. Now this can be played a couple of times a week until everybody is certain of the names of those parts. But simply you'd write a circle on the board or draw a circle on the board large with some blue tack, and you have the card sitting upside down in front of the circle, and each group sends a person up and they have to take a card at random, for example the circumference, and they have to pin it onto the board for the part that they think is the circumference. If they get it correct, they get a point. If they don't, they lose a point. Segment will go here. And as learners are doing this, the idea is that their group is giving them hints about this as well. So it's that collaborative learning model. The radius, the sector. Now there's always going to be one of these that's a little bit more difficult than the others. Usually the chord and the arc are the more difficult parts. And so the idea of this game is that learners see when somebody else has got the hard one and they're beginning to think about where that fits. This game is quick. It should take no longer than 5 minutes. Can be repeated once, twice, 3 times, then that's it. And you'll find that all the learners will have a pretty good idea of all of these words. Just to recap this very quickly, you're going to begin with a discussion about what learners already know. Number 2, have learners create their own circle resource. Learners explore the circle components. That is, they're talking about it. They're trying to figure out what might have a name and what might not. Then they do the matching activity, and this is where you're beginning to tell them what those parts are, and you'll only need to tell them what a few of the words are that they don't know already. And finally, finish with a game just to consolidate what they already know. And as for the hack is simply this. Instead of sitting up and cutting out paper circles, go to the shop and buy paper plates, cheap paper plates that learners can fold and then cut up. Perfect.